Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cafe IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is John Bauters. John is the mayor of the small but mighty city of Emeryville, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. As an elected official, he also serves on several boards and commissions in the Bay Area. An Emeryville resident since 2012, John is a former legal aid attorney who represented victims of domestic violence, people who are experiencing homelessness, and tenants facing eviction. John currently works as a nonprofit policy director on behalf of victims of violent crime and as an advocate for investments in community-based behavioral health programs that promote wellness and community safety. John is an animal lover, a bicyclist, an outdoors enthusiast, and can often be spotted on the Bay Trail or the Emeryville Greenway. John, welcome to Cafe IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for inviting me to be here today, Pat.
Well, John, a big shout out today to all of my colleagues on the IBTTA staff for their tremendous work in this very challenging year. They have supported IBTTA's mission as a convener, an advocate, and an information resource for the tolling and road charging industries. Well, this is Cafe IBTTA, where we drink coffee and we talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And we are taking your questions, and we want to get started right away. I mentioned that John lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm wearing my Golden Gate Bridge tie in honor of that. And so in the chat, we invite you to express your thoughts or feelings about the San Francisco Bay Area. Come on and tell us what your thoughts are about the Bay Area. All right, this is audience participation. Foggy, okay, thank you, Rush. Diverse, yeah, we'll talk more about Barry Bonds. Progressive, cool, lovely area. All right, we got a few participants coming in here. And the city, Andrew Pepard. All right, thank you, man. Well, John, let's turn to you. You are the mayor of Emeryville, California, in the Bay Area. Tell us a little bit about Emeryville and how you came to serve on city council and mayor.
Okay, Pat. Well, Emeryville, there's 101 cities in the Bay Area. And by land size, Emeryville is number 100 in size. So we're very, as you noted, small, but very mighty city. Emeryville has been around since the late 1800s. It is a former industrial city. Its kind of known reputation has been as a city of vice. So it was created and carved out as a township that became a city to avoid kind of morality laws in the late 1800s related to gambling, horse race tracks, bordellos, drinking. There was a lot of kind of good people in the neighboring cities of Oakland and Berkeley, and a number of people who ran and made money off of these types of gambling and speakeasy operations formed Emeryville basically to avoid being morally legislated. It was an industrial city for most of its life up until the late 1980s, where industry kind of failed. And at that time, it kind of reinvented itself as a business and shopping center for the Bay Area. So there were very few residents in Emeryville until about the turn of the current century. And Emeryville has been a very dynamic city in the last 20 years. It is one of the fastest growing cities in California. It has been in the top 10 fastest growing cities for many years now. And we've really invested a lot of our time on sustainability, environmental justice issues, because the city is laden with a lot of toxics from its industrial days. It's bisected by the Union Pacific Railroad. We're the last place that you pass through before you reach the Port of Oakland. And we're also the home of the MacArthur Maze, which is the eastern footprint leading into the Bay Bridge, which I know that some of your members here probably are familiar with. And so that's made us a natural geographic and transportation hub. So a lot of transportation innovation is done here. Emeryville is a place that's got a lot of biotech and life science industry here right now. And we've been building housing at a very high clip. With a very small footprint, we build a lot of dense urban housing. So we have to think really carefully about the space we use and how we use it. And that's led us to be regarded generally in the region and somewhere, beyond that actually as leaders on land use and infrastructure development.
John, most of the audience today are folks who work in the tolling industry, and these are folks who operate statewide tolling systems or urban expressways, price managed lanes, bridges and tunnels. You are an unabashed bicycle enthusiast.
Right.
And in a small but mighty city like Emeryville, you have special transportation needs. Could you talk about some of those special transportation needs and how you guys are addressing them?
Yeah, so as I previously mentioned, our geographic location dictates a lot of the things that we think about and talk about. One of them is definitely transportation. Emeryville has a marina that services the east side of the bay. We have the Amtrak Capital Corridor Station, the western terminus for the Chicago Zephyr Express is over here. We also are the midpoint for the Coast Starlight on the Amtrak. The Capital Corridor service between San Jose and Sacramento has a hub here. So there's a lot of train service here. We provide transit needs to our city in a number of different ways. It's very easy for this to be a car congested location, especially with the shopping centers we have. So Emeryville is one of the few places in the United States that has a free transit system. We have something called the Emery-Go-Round. Every property owner in the city pays into a parcel-based improvement district. And that district is used to fund and finance 3 shuttle service lines that operate different routes in the city and connect people to regional rail and BART, which is just, the station is just out across our border in Oakland. So we operate that. We operate something called 8 to Go, which is a paratransit service and a senior transportation service. So anybody over the age of 70 can ride it for free. If you're between the ages of 55 and 70, you can ride it for $1. If you are living with a disability, you can also ride it for free. It's a call on demand service that takes people anywhere in our zip code and to regional medical centers. And then we're building a ton of bike lanes and other micromobility infrastructure. We have a number of projects we've just completed. We have some currently in construction around our schools, and we have a couple of very large ones on main arterial corridors that we're looking to complete our funding gap on in order to get under construction and finished in the next couple of years. Emeryville is second only to San Francisco in the Bay Area as a city in terms of the number of people who commute by something other than a single occupancy vehicle. About 1/3 of our city commutes by walking, biking, or taking transit. And so we do have a very wide range of transit use here and modality use, and that is integral to how we identify ourselves.
I was detecting a theme there as you were reviewing all of the different transportation options in Emeryville and in the Bay Area. There was, mostly mention of transit, active transportation, bicycling, etc., and not a whole lot of mention of car or automobile transportation. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that. One thing I was going to mention is that you refer to yourself as not anti-car, but anti-car everything, right?
Right. Yeah. So transportation, we do have a lot of people drive here. One of the things we can't ignore is in the late 90s and early 2000s, several large shopping centers with surface parking lots were built here, and they attract their magnets for cars. But to your point, one of the things that I always say people see us building all this bike infrastructure, and a common pushback I get, there's several of them, but one of them is, you're trying to make everyone ride in a car. I'm not trying to make anyone ride in a car, or I'm sorry, ride on a bike. I'm not trying to make anyone ride in a bike. I don't have any, delusions as to what people will do for choices. If they want to do what they want to do, they will. But what I always respond to folks about is that, we don't actually create safe options and safe choices for people. And when people are presented with safe choices, they make different choices. Those are sometimes personal choices, life choices, economic choices. But if you give people meaningful choices, then they make different ones with those factors in mind. And so I've always said, there's no reason to tell people to give up their car. Some bike activists and advocates say, why don't you push harder to eliminate all the cars? I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is show people that not everything requires a car, right? That if you live a half mile from your grocery store, or from the place where you go and get your hair or nails done, or you take your kids to daycare, whatever it is that you're doing on a given day, there should be options that are safe and accessible to you that allow you to say, I don't need to use a car to take this trip, because all the traffic that we have, you're the traffic. You are the traffic. So when people complain about traffic, I said, well, what have you done to, curtail that? because there's this perception that it's this other thing that we haven't solved for. But the reason it exists is because people get in their car because that's the only choice available. And then we help induce demand by saying, gosh, well, there's a lot of people in the cars and they're complaining about the traffic, so we should add another lane to this bridge or this road or this highway. And all we're doing is inducing further demand. People hear new lane is coming and they continue to use their car. Whereas if we created the space instead to say there's a transit only dedicated lane here on the bridge or through the city, or there's a bike path that cuts through the whole city and you can transverse the city outside of the car grid and get to from A to B safely, then we've given people meaningful choices. And even if they don't use those choices for everything they do, there are a lot of short distance things that they do that could relieve the burden that they create in terms of noise and air pollution and other types of public safety needs on the community by giving them alternatives to the use of a car.
What you're saying reminds me of a tweet I saw the other day from Andy Bono. You probably follow him. He's a transportation expert and activist. And he used an analogy. He said, if you hand somebody I'm screwing up an avocado. If you hand somebody an avocado and ask them to envision something, they're probably not going to, somebody who's never seen an avocado, they're not going to envision guacamole, right?
Right.
And in a similar fashion, if a planning group asks people to envision transportation alternatives, you're likely to hear crickets, because they can't conceive of things that may be outside their own experience.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you can't, and that comes back to the vision of things. Like I get a lot of emails, phone calls, voicemails from people who have opinions about the things we're doing, or when we go out and do a community meeting and say we're gonna do this plan here, we're gonna do something to this street. So I think at Doyle Street, we during COVID closed an entire street in the middle of our city, a north-south street that was between two designated kind of like vehicle routes, arterials. And it was being used as a cut through, and it was all stop signs in a neighborhood that had parks and playgrounds and other things on it that were sensitive. People were speeding through it and driving through it at high volumes. And we decided during COVID at the beginning, we're going to close it and turn it into bike ped space. And it was going to be an open street. And we closed some blocks completely. We made traffic one directional and slowed it in other blocks. And, when we started that, there's lots of orange barricades and barrels and things everywhere. And some people in the area were just like, what are you doing? And I park here and you close this block. And they couldn't really see the vision. We're like, actually, we think this would make your neighborhood a lot safer. It'll be a lot quieter. It'll be a lot safer. The kids will be able to go to the parks and playgrounds in this neighborhood from your home safely on a protected space. And a lot of people didn't really see it. We didn't waste any time. I know from experience that if you actually build something like that and you do it quickly, and people will adapt their transportation choices quickly. And the reality was we went out, we got a grant, and we made all the improvements that we were temporarily piloting into a fully completed project. Like we built it out within 12 months of COVID starting, and the traffic count is almost zero on that street now. It's quiet. The air quality is way better in that neighborhood, and kids are on scooters and bikes going from their homes to the playgrounds and the parks. And then I've not had a single person complain to me about it since then. Residents and parents are just like, we love this. We taught our kids to bike in your neighborhood here. Like, just people love it. And so a lot of times we only hear the people who have, to your point, can't see that it could be guacamole. They can't see that this would be good for themselves and their neighborhood because they think this will somehow disrupt everything, because to them it will disrupt what they did on a daily basis. But we told people, like, you can go park your car on the other street right here. And they just couldn't like break their mind of what they had always done. And once we just kind of forced it, they all adapted and everybody realized, oh, this is actually kind of nice. So it takes sometimes like kind of plowing through the resistance to things that are different or not what people are used to or accustomed to in order to help them see that we can actually have nice things.
Our guest today is John Bauters. He is the mayor of Emeryville, California, in the East Bay of San Francisco Bay Area. He's also state director for the Alliance for Safety and Justice. And we are taking your questions. We'd love to see your questions in the chat. Please select all panelists and attendees or everyone. John, safety seems to be a major concern of you and the city council and others in Emeryville. And recently you tweeted a letter that you received from a student about pedestrian safety. Talk to us about some of the things that you're doing to enhance pedestrian safety in your city.
Wow. Yeah. So, I really love getting constituent emails, whether they're mad about something we're doing or whether they have a question or they're happy about it. Each of those is an opportunity in my mind for us to communicate what we're doing. And so that tweet, I started sharing some of my responses. It's a more recent thing I've been doing. The emails I receive and the responses I give to model for other elected officials how you can talk about what we're doing. Because I think a lot of people don't know how to respond to the vitriol or the backlash, about like you put this new diverter on my street. But in our case, we're doing a whole bunch of things. I mentioned Doyle Street already. As part of our annual street repaving program, we build in bike and pedestrian enhancements that are part of our active transportation plan into our annual street repaving program. So every year we take something between 10 and 25% of our streets and we repave them to keep our pavement index level high, which allows us to continue to receive funding for projects we want to do. We have an active transportation plan that envisions a safer community, which includes things like pedestrian bulb outs, protected bike lanes, removing parking, narrowing streets, putting in diverters, other types of signals, bike shares, things like that. And when we pick the neighborhood we're going to do for the repaving, we basically pick up the parallel plans and we say, what can we build into this contract to save us cost and overhead and time and not leave the neighborhood in construction way longer than it needs to be. And so in those cases, we've done a bunch of things, and we got projects right now to put dual direction protected cycle track from the high school and middle school to an existing bike route. We across the street at an all language school, we're putting in a diverter so that it's no longer a cut through and a pass through where people were speeding by the school. You can't go more than the driveway of the school on the street. So it's a dead end. And we put in a curb separated diverter there where we put in an entire dual direction bike path in front of the East Bay German language school near the south end of our city, so that we created daylighting between drivers at pickup and kids who were riding their bikes to school. They weren't having to bike out between parked cars into traffic on 41st. We said they should have the curbside route. And so we've just been doing stuff like this, pedestrian protected intersections at a couple of our streets where we've had speeding, so that people speeding through some of our neighborhoods who want to make a turn, they got to slow down because there's now a giant curb, island out in the intersection before they can make that angled curve. So we've been doing stuff like that. We have a whole bunch of projects like this right now. But we've done other things alongside it. Like the city put bus seats at all of our bus stops in this year. We had some gaps on that. And I was like, if you want people to use transit, they need to have a place to sit. So we did a quick build program and put bus seating. So now every bus stop in the city has a bench or a seat. So we do a lot of stuff around that. And it's not always the large, huge project that makes the news that's the best thing to do. Sometimes it's the unsuspecting and unsexy things you do that just turn a person's walk from their school to their home into a pleasant, safe experience. And that's what matters.
It sounds like a lot of this effort is aimed at safety and quality of life. And speaking of that, in your day job, and I hesitate to say day job because your service as mayor and on a bunch of boards and commissions, I'm sure that takes up a lot of your daytime as well. But you serve as the state director for the Alliance for Safety and Justice. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, the kind of work that you do there?
Sure. So as you mentioned in my introduction, I was an attorney for low-income people who were homeless, families facing eviction, domestic violence survivors for roughly the first decade of my career. And for the last 10 years or so plus now, I've been working as an advocate and a state director at the Alliance for Safety and Justice. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization that recenters the discussion about how we spend money in the public safety space, how we recenter around victims of violent crime. So much of the public safety system is around this model of punishment that's extremely ineffective in reducing recidivism, which is repeat criminal behavior. And there's just tons of evidence that shows that if you actually invest in community wellness, you invest in the needs of victims of crime, and you prioritize community-based wellness and health programs, mental health in particular, addiction treatment programs, that's actually what prevents crime. But we don't actually make a meaningful investment in communities in those spaces. And so we've seen huge increases in homelessness. We see increases in addiction use. And it's because we're treating it after the fact. We're putting people in jails and prisons thinking that that's going to somehow rehabilitate people, and it doesn't. So a lot of my work, I write laws for a living, and I introduce laws through state legislatures to improve the quality of life for people. So one of the most common areas that I work on nationally is trauma recovery centers, which is an integrated behavioral health services model designed to meet the victim of a crime where they're at. So as opposed to you coming to me and me giving you a referral to go over to person A for some type of service you need, who then says you need to see person B for this other type of care you need, and then you need to see person C. The person who's experiencing trauma is not going to follow through with that. It's an overwhelming thing in their life in many cases. They can't go to work. They are triggered by things that remind them of the traumatic event. They are experiencing extreme grief and loss. And so what we do is we advocate for the integration of all those services into single locations where there's an entire complement of people who meet the person where they're at and provide holistic care and individualized treatment to them to help make it possible for them to get out of bed in the morning, in some cases, go to work, re-engage with their family, avoid self-harm. And we know that by helping victims of violent crime actively and proactively, we actually end violence. A lot of people who have been victims of crime actually perpetuate crime at some point. We always say hurt people hurt people. So it's really my focus in my professional job is around public safety reform with a reprioritization of community health and wellness.
That is an amazing story, John, about the work that you do and the work that so many other people do to prevent and intervene in these kinds of situations where people are hurting themselves and they're hurting others. And it seems to me there's a big communications component to that. And I want to return for a moment to transportation and your role as a communicator. You know, in the tolling industry, the issue of tolls or the issues of price managed lanes is not always one of the happiest things on the public policy agenda. And, you know, we in the tolling industry sometimes hear hostility from our constituents. And you as a public official have been very outspoken on some issues where you'll find people on Twitter or elsewhere who severely disagree with you, but you don't seem to have a big problem with that. You seem to roll with the punches. And I wonder if you could talk to us about how you respond to that hostility and how you get beyond that.
Sure. Well, there's layers to answering that question. I mean, I think for me, I've had a lifetime of experience working with this kind of issue as an openly LGBT youth. I've in the Midwest, I've dealt with this since the mid 90s, having people be, you know, hostile in one way or another. I think it depends on what the origin or what the purpose of it is. If it's an ad hominem thing, like using a gay slur or, you know, trying to get at me personally, I just honestly, like, I'm a very like resilient person. I don't really engage anything like that. It doesn't bother me. It's not nice to see, but it's not something that consumes my time. It's a design. Those are usually things people say that are designed to undermine what you're doing. And it's usually a reflection of them and not you, is my experience. When it comes to people who disagree and they're really openly hostile to something we're doing, there's a couple ways to manage it, right? First of all, I always listen. Whether I like what is being said or agree with what's being said, I always make sure I'm careful to listen, because if your initial reaction is an emotional one, you can misunderstand or actually exacerbate whatever the miscommunication is. I also teach people who work with me or for me that we should always assume that communication errors begin with us. So even if somebody comes to us and says, you know, you did this and this and this and this, and I don't see it that way, or you know, there's a situation that's really touchy, I often just start from a place of apologizing, that I apologize that there was a miscommunication between us. I don't have to assign responsibility. I apologize that there was a miscommunication, right? What can we do to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future? And I just remain calm about it. And I would say 90% of the types of things I get from folks are addressed by just showing people, like, I'm not an adversarial person to you. When I started on the city council years ago, I would say about 40 to 50% of the emails I got were people who were upset with the city for something, one reason or another. They wanted us to fix something or do something. I can't think of the last time I received an angry or upset email. Even the couple that I get recently about, what are you doing with the bike lanes? They're not angry and upset. And in my experience, the way I've managed that is I just am present and responsive. The more you're present and responsive, the sooner people realize that like you're accessible, that they can get an answer from you. And it doesn't feel like this is going to be some, battle. I had a mayor of a neighboring city say to me once, because I do a regular town hall around the city. He's like, don't you get tired of people yelling at you? And I said, nobody yells at me. They know I come back every couple of weeks. They know I'm going to get an answer to their question. They know that I'm there to hear from them and discuss with them. I don't keep anything off limits, and it like really relaxes everybody. Their guard goes down. It's not us versus the mayor. It's okay. He's here to tell us and help us what it is we're working on. Now, sure, there's some people who really don't like some of the things I do, and there's some very hostile people to some of the things we're doing. But in the end, I always listen to what Mark Twain said, right? If you're at a public meeting or a public forum and someone really wants to go after you, right? Mark Twain said, never argue with a fool in the public. The public won't know which of you is really the fool. And that served me so well. There's a lot of times where people just get up on their high horse and spout things at me. And rather than engage them or defend myself, I thank them for their comment. And the rest of the room realizes like, that person is crazy or wrong or off the rocker or whatever. And I don't have to say it. I don't have to say anything. And when there is misinformation, all I do is rather than say you're wrong and blah, blah, I just say, well, in case you didn't know, this is what we're doing, because maybe the person speaking genuinely doesn't know. And so correcting people doesn't have to be this adversarial exercise either. Communication is key to getting anything done. And I've learned through my personal experience that when you're a very good communicator, you get a lot more done.
John, your preferred mode of transportation, bicycle and walking and hiking, seems to be a way to enhance communication. For instance, when you're riding around the city, you have a greater opportunity to speak with your constituents because you're not sealed up inside a car. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I talk to everybody. It's easy. I'm going from point A to B on my bicycle and I see a neighbor or someone sees me and they say, hey, Mayor, I can just stop my bike, pull off to the side of the road, hop up on the sidewalk and have a 10-minute conversation. Nobody can see you or hear you, and you can't stop your car in the middle of the street usually, and people don't. And so I engage residents all the time. I find it funny. I was hosting the Dutch consulate from the Netherlands this past year, and I took them on a biking tour of the city, and we were biking up the street. Everybody coming down the bike street, hi Mayor, on their bikes. And they were like, do you really just know everybody here? And I was like, I wouldn't say everybody, but I do know a lot of people. And I meet lots of people. Walking my dog, they have a dog, I stop and I talk to them. Being outside of your car and being at a human scale and engaging with other people at a human scale is actually the biggest way to improve community safety. When we all feel socially bonded and connected with one another and know who each other are, right? Like, well, there's a guy walking down the street with a pit bull. He could be a scary, bad dude in some people's minds. But if you're driving by, this is not a safe neighborhood. That's what a lot of people conclude. I walk down the street and I see a guy with a pit bull and his dog wants to play with my dog. And we're having a whole conversation. I find out this guy works at TSA and, he's just moved to the city and he's learning stuff. And I, tell him where he can go to the dog park and this and that. And like we form social bonds, and that improves community safety. That improves our expectation and our willingness to support one another when we see things happening. And that's how we make our communities better. So it's not just a communication technique for me. It's actually also a proactive safety activity that I'm engaged in. And so, yeah, I do definitely believe that walking and biking is the more social way to improve the livability and safety in your community.
That's fantastic. John, I'm going to make a couple of announcements, and then I'm going to come back to you for some final words of wisdom.
Okay.
So December 15th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, the IBTTA virtual book club discussion. We will be talking about Raising My Rainbow by Lori Duran. Then January 12th, we have a DEI virtual safe space conversation, 11 to 1 p.m. with Greg Bradley, who many of you know from having served and presented at our meeting in Austin. The IBTTA winter board meeting is in person, January 18 through 20 in Coral Gables, Florida. Please check the IBTTA website for details about all of our upcoming events. So John, what final words of wisdom do you have for us before we sign off today?
Well, I first want to just thank you, Pat, for inviting me and everybody at IBTTA for joining for the chat this morning. The words of wisdom I have are brief. They're the ones you often will see me place on a tweet in Twitter, and they're go outside. And it's not just a slogan. It's not just a catchy thing I like to say. Being outside and spending time outside, whether that's active transportation work on your own time with walking or biking, spending 20 minutes alone in a park or a place that's nature-based does immense wonders to mental health. It's scientifically proven to do that. And since a lot of my work in my city life is around land use and transportation and holistic community development, and in my professional space is really about mental wellness and care, I couldn't think of a better way to bridge those two things than to ask people to spend more time outside. When we go outside, we improve our communities, but we also improve our own well-being. And it's really about putting our own health and wellness first. It's good for our physical health, but it's actually very good for your mental health. So that's my words of wisdom, is that a lot of people say, how do you get everything done that you do in the day? And how do you look so healthy and young for a person your age? Because I'm a lot older than some of these folks probably think I am. And my answer is I go outside. And so I would just encourage you to make time in your life every day to go outside and do that for yourself too.
John, thank you so much for being our guest today. Your words have inspired us and filled us with wisdom. And to all our viewers in Cafe IBTTA, be safe, keep in touch, go outside, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.